Selina lives in silence in her son's mansion, treated like a maid by her own daughter-in-law. Helen, behind her perfect facade, plans to institutionalize her and erase her past from the house. But the unexpected arrival of Robert begins to reveal a disturbing truth. When he discovers everything, he must choose between the wife he idealized and the mother who always protected him. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. At the Miller Mansion, nestled in the upper reaches of Aspenwood, where the crisp Appalachian air brought coolness even on the hottest days, Mrs. Eleanor observed the garden through the window while dusting the antique furniture. Her gnarled fingers, deformed by arthritis, gripped the cloth with difficulty. The pain was constant, but silence was her most faithful companion. At 73, her face bore the marks of a life that told stories her voice no longer dared to narrate. The sound of heels on the marble announced the arrival of Helen, her daughter-in-law, a woman of studied beauty, 38 years old, with an always calculated expression and precise gestures. She descended the stairs like someone on a runway, conscious of her presence. "Mrs. Eleanor, I see you haven't finished the living room yet," Helen commented, feigning disappointment. "Robert will be back from his trip tonight, and I'd like everything to be impeccable." "I'm almost done, my dear," Eleanor replied, hiding the tremor in her hands. "I just need to give the crystals a final touch." "The crystals are too delicate for those hands, don't you think?" Helen smiled, but her eyes remained cold. "Better let me take care of that later. Now, why don't you clean the upstairs bathrooms? And while you're at it, organize that closet. It's a real mess." The elderly woman nodded, resigned. As she slowly climbed the stairs, she remembered when that mansion was her kingdom. For 40 years, she commanded that house with love, raising her only son, Robert, after the early passing of her husband, Anthony. "It's therapeutic to stay active," Helen always said when assigning her increasingly heavy tasks. But Eleanor knew that behind that false concern, something darker was hidden. Upstairs, Nancy, the housekeeper who had served the family for 2 decades, discreetly helped Eleanor. "Mrs. Eleanor, let me finish this. You should be resting," she whispered, looking nervously at the door. "I can't, Nancy. Helen will notice. You know how observant she is." "This isn't right. You're Mr. Miller's mother. You shouldn't be on your knees cleaning bathrooms." Nancy frowned. "If Mr. Robert knew. Robert has too many concerns with the company for me to bother him with trifles." Eleanor smiled sadly. "Besides, Helen is an excellent wife to him. She keeps everything in order. She's dedicated to the image she's built," Nancy murmured, too low for the elderly woman to hear. In the mansion's office, Helen spoke on the phone while watching the driver arrive with groceries through the window. "I told you everything is under control, Diane. Robert suspects nothing." The old woman. "She's perfect in the role of the poor dear." Helen laughed, tossing her hair back. "So of course I'm still paying for that nursing home in Crestwood. The deposit is automatic, because sooner or later I'll manage to convince Robert that it's the best place for her." Meanwhile, at LaGuardia Airport in New York City, Robert Miller, 45, a successful entrepreneur in the civil construction business, boarded his car after returning from Chicago. Tall, with graying temples that gave him a distinguished air, he thought of his mother and how much he missed her during his trips. He felt that something was different at home in recent months, but attributed it to the difficult adaptation between the 2 women in his life. "To the mansion, Julian?" "Yes, sir. Mrs. Helen called 3 times today asking about your arrival time." Robert smiled, interpreting that as his wife's loving concern. Their 8-year marriage with Helen was, in his eyes, the realization of a dream. They met when he was inaugurating a large development in New York, where she worked as a public relations officer. It was immediate passion for the elegant and determined woman who conquered not only him but everyone around her. When he decided it was time for his mother to leave the house where she had lived her entire life to move in with them in Aspenwood, Helen surprised him with her enthusiasm. "Your mother deserves all our care and attention," she had said. In the first few months everything went well, with Helen showing impeccable attention to her mother-in-law. But little by little, something changed. Eleanor seemed quieter, more withdrawn. When he questioned Helen, she always had convincing explanations. "It's her age, dear. She's becoming more dependent, more confused. We need to be patient." The car was traversing the winding road that led to Aspenwood when Robert's cell phone rang. It was Martha, his secretary. "Mr. Miller, I apologize for bothering you, but Mr. Paul called 3 times today. He said it's urgent to talk about those documents you left on the desk." Robert frowned. "Which documents?" "I'm not sure, but he mentioned something about the clinic in Crestwood." "Clinic in Crestwood? I don't know what he's talking about. There must be some mistake. When we get to the mansion, I'll call him." Upon arriving home, Robert was greeted with usual perfection. Helen, stunning in a navy blue dress, awaited him on the main staircase, with champagne glasses already poured. The house shone, impeccable as always, but his eyes searched for another face. "Where's my mother?" he asked after kissing his wife. "Oh, she was so tired. You know how it is. She wanted to help too much today and ended up exhausted. She said she was going to bed early, but I asked Nancy to serve her some tea in her room." Helen smiled, handing him the glass. "Come on, I want to hear all about your trip." Later that night, after Helen had fallen asleep, Robert walked silently to his mother's room. He knocked gently on the door. "Come in," a weak voice replied. Eleanor was sitting in an armchair by the window, her trembling hands holding an old photo album. Upon seeing her son, her face lit up with a genuine smile. "My son, I missed you so much," she exclaimed in a low voice. Robert hugged her, noticing how much more fragile she seemed since they last saw each other. He sat beside her, looking at the old photographs. "How are you, Mom? Are you being well treated?" "Of course, son. Helen is very attentive," Eleanor replied automatically, like someone reciting a rehearsed phrase. Something in her gaze, however, stirred an uneasiness in Robert that he couldn't name, a shadow, a fear, something that didn't match the strong and determined mother he knew. "You're different. Is something wrong?" "Nonsense, son. It's just tiredness. Age, you know." She averted her gaze to the photographs. "Look at this one. You at 5 years old when your father built that treehouse." Robert allowed his mother to change the subject, but the uneasiness remained. In the hallway, returning to his room, he found Nancy still awake. "Nancy, is my mother really well?" The housekeeper hesitated, looking nervously around. "Mrs. Eleanor is a warrior, Mr. Miller." "That's not what I asked." "You should observe more. That's all I can say," Nancy replied, quickly moving away. Confused, Robert returned to the room where Helen slept serenely. He looked at his wife, so perfect, so dedicated, and tried to shake off the uncomfortable feeling that was beginning to grow within him. He decided that, starting the next day, he would pay more attention. Something wasn't right in that mansion, which from the outside seemed the perfect image of happiness. The morning arrived with the typical Aspenwood fog, enveloping the Miller mansion in a white mantle that seemed to separate it from the rest of the world. In the kitchen, Mrs. Eleanor silently prepared breakfast, as she did every morning before Helen woke up. It was her small moment of peace, of connection with the routine she had maintained for decades. Her aching fingers manipulated the dough for the pain de queijo, Brazilian cheese bread rolls that Robert had loved since childhood. Nancy entered the kitchen, and her eyes widened at seeing the elderly woman up so early. "Mrs. Eleanor, you shouldn't be resting. Your hands are more swollen today." "I want to make something special for Robert. It's been so long since we had breakfast together." She smiled, ignoring the pain. "Besides, I need to take advantage while Helen is still asleep." "The mistress has been complaining that you invade the kitchen," Nancy commented, lowering her voice. "But this has always been your territory, hasn't it?" Eleanor simply nodded, focused on the task. For her, cooking for her son was a form of love that words couldn't express. It was also one of the few pleasures she had left in that house, which ironically had been her home for so long, and now seemed like a gilded cage. Upstairs, Robert woke up alone in bed. He found a note on the nightstand, written in Helen's impeccable handwriting. "Went to the spa, back for lunch, love you." He dressed unhurriedly and went downstairs, surprised by the aroma coming from the kitchen. Upon seeing his mother working with difficulty, he felt a pang of guilt. He hadn't realized how much she had aged in recent months. "Mum, you shouldn't be straining yourself so much." Eleanor turned, startled, but her face soon lit up with a smile. "Son, how good that you woke up early. I made your favorite pain de queijo and that strong coffee you like." They sat at the kitchen table as they had years ago, before his marriage, before the move to the mansion. For a moment, time seemed to rewind. Robert observed his mother's hands, deformed by arthritis, and felt a tightening in his heart. "Are you taking your medicine properly? Your hands look worse." "Yes, I am. It's just the humidity from the mountains that increases the pain." She averted her gaze. "And you? How was your trip to Chicago?" The conversation flowed naturally for some time, until Robert mentioned something that bothered him. "Mum, yesterday my secretary mentioned a clinic in Crestwood. Do you know anything about that?" Eleanor's face paled. Her hands trembled, spilling a little coffee. "I don't know anything about any clinic," she replied quickly, getting up to wipe the spilled coffee. "Helen never mentioned anything like that to me." Before Robert could press the issue, his cell phone rang. It was Paul, his partner, urgently wanting to discuss the new development. He said goodbye to his mother, promising to continue the conversation later. But the look of fear he had seen on her face remained etched in his memory. Meanwhile, at the Blue Mountain Spa, Helen chatted animatedly with her best friend Diane as they received facial treatments. "So Robert's back already. And the old woman, how did she react?" Diane asked, adjusting the towel on her head. "As always, pretending everything's fine. I managed to convince him she's becoming senile. Soon he'll suggest the clinic himself." Helen smiled, satisfied. "The hard part is putting up with those maids, especially Nancy, who's known the family forever and keeps trying to challenge me." "Why don't you just fire her?" Robert wouldn't allow it. He's too sentimental about family tradition things. Besides, it would be too obvious. I prefer to undermine her gradually, like I'm doing with my mother-in-law. Diane laughed, admiring her friend's calculating coldness. "And what did the old woman do to deserve so much hatred?" Helen suddenly became serious. She never truly accepted me. It was always, "my son this, my son that," as if he were her property. She paused, her eyes hardening. "And there's the money, of course, the Miller fortune. Robert is an only child and heir to everything. As long as the old woman is around, he'll never be completely mine." Back at the mansion, Nancy watched Mrs. Eleanor slowly organizing the house's silverware, a task assigned by Helen before she left. The housekeeper approached, offering help. "Mrs. Eleanor, it pains me to see you like this. The lady of this house working like a maid," Eleanor completed with a sad smile. "There's no dishonor in work, Nancy. The problem is the intention behind it. You need to tell Mr. Robert. He wouldn't allow this if he knew." Eleanor sighed deeply, placing a silver spoon back in the box. "Robert loves Helen. She makes him happy, at least that's what it seems. I can't destroy that. But you're suffering." "It's better this way, believe me. I tried to talk to him at first, and Helen managed to reverse everything, making it seem like I was confused, jealous." She wiped a furtive tear. "The worst part is it worked. Robert started looking at me with pity, as if I were a spoiled child." Nancy was about to respond when they heard the sound of heels on the marble. Helen was back. Quickly, the two returned to work. "I see you're busy," Helen commented with false sweetness. "Nancy, I need you to prepare a special dinner tonight. I've invited some important friends of Robert's, and Mrs. Eleanor—" She paused, analyzing the elderly woman from head to toe. "Tonight you can rest in your room. It wouldn't be appropriate to have you at the table with such important people." "As you wish, Helen," Eleanor replied, head bowed. After Helen left, Nancy couldn't contain her indignation. "This is too much. You're the owner's mother." "It's all right, Nancy. I actually prefer to stay in my room. These parties tire me out." But that same afternoon, while Eleanor was resting, Helen entered her room without knocking. She carried a simple black dress and an apron. "I changed my mind, Mrs. Eleanor. You'll help us serve tonight. My parlor maid fell ill at the last minute." Her tone was casual, but her eyes gleamed with cruel satisfaction. "Just stay in the kitchen and bring the trays when Nancy calls. Nothing too much for someone so active, is it?" Eleanor felt her stomach sink. Serving in the house that had been hers in front of her son's friends was the ultimate humiliation. But she knew that refusing would mean a scene, perhaps even Helen's fake tears to Robert. Claiming her mother-in-law didn't want to help at an important moment. "I'll be there," she replied simply. That night, the mansion transformed. Sophisticated lights illuminated the garden, ambient music played softly, and the aroma of food prepared by Nancy and her team filled the air. Guests began to arrive, influential businessmen, local politicians, people who could help Robert's business. From the kitchen, Eleanor watched through the partially open door. She saw her son, elegant in his dark suit, greeting guests alongside his dazzling wife. Helen was, undoubtedly, the perfect hostess. She smiled, touched people's arms as she spoke, laughed at the right moments. An impeccable actress. "Ready, Mrs. Eleanor?" Nancy asked, handing her a tray with glasses of sparkling wine. "Yes, let's go." With careful steps, Eleanor entered the room. Immediately, she felt some curious glances. An older lady, wife of one of the businessmen, frowned as she recognized her. "Isn't that Robert's mother?" she murmured to her husband, loud enough to be heard. Robert, who was chatting animatedly with a politician, turned and saw his mother carrying the heavy tray dressed like a maid. His face registered first surprise, then confusion. Helen, noticing the moment, quickly approached. "Oh, darling, it wasn't necessary. I told you could rest," she said loudly for everyone to hear, while smiling through gritted teeth. Robert approached, visibly disconcerted. "Mum, what are you doing? Leave that to the staff." "I wanted to help," Eleanor replied softly. "Helen said the parlor maid fell ill." "Nonsense," Helen interrupted, laughing nervously. "She must have misunderstood. You know how confused she gets sometimes," she added, addressing the nearby guests, who smiled politely. Robert gently took the tray from his mother's hands. "Go rest, Mum, please." Embarrassed, Eleanor withdrew under the watchful eyes of the guests. In the kitchen, Nancy awaited her with a glass of water and an expression of contained fury. "Did you see what she did? She humiliated you in front of everyone." "I saw," Eleanor replied, with surprising calm. "And Robert saw it too." Indeed, while the guests dined in the dining room, Robert remained distant, thoughtful. Something was wrong, very wrong. And for the first time he began to suspect that the problem wasn't his mother being confused, as Helen insisted. 3 days after the dinner, the unease did not abandon Robert. The image of his mother carrying the tray, dressed as a servant, resurfaced in his mind with uncomfortable frequency. In the construction company's office in downtown New York City, he could barely concentrate on the projects that demanded his attention. "Robert, are you all right?" Paul, his partner and childhood friend, asked as he entered the room with a pile of documents. "You seem distant since you returned from Chicago." "I'm worried about my mother," Robert confessed, spinning his chair to face the view of the Long Island Sound through the panoramic window. "I think something isn't right at home." Paul hesitated, placing the documents on the table. "Does this have anything to do with that clinic in Crestwood?" "Sorry, I mentioned it to your secretary, but I found it strange to find those papers among the contracts you left for review." "Which papers exactly? Do you still have them?" "No, Helen showed up the next day and said she had put them there by mistake. She took everything back." Paul paused, choosing his words. "They were receipts for monthly payments and a kind of pre-contract with a nursing home. They had your mother's name on them." Robert frowned, a sense of alarm growing within him. "Helen never mentioned anything about admitting my mother." "Perhaps it's just research for the future," Paul suggested, trying to lighten the situation. "Helen has always been very organized, planning everything in advance." "Perhaps." But the answer sounded empty even to Robert's own ears. That afternoon, instead of heading to Aspenwood as usual, Robert drove to the apartment he kept in the Hamptons, rarely used since his marriage. He needed a space to think, away from Helen's watchful eyes. He called her, inventing a last-minute meeting with investors that might extend late. "Don't wait for me for dinner. I might sleep at the Hamptons' apartment." "But, darling, I had prepared a surprise for you," Helen protested, her voice soft as always. "All right, I understand that work comes first. Just don't forget that tomorrow we have that lunch with the mayor." "I won't forget." Alone in the apartment, Robert opened a bottle of wine and sat on the balcony overlooking the sea. The waves crashed on the beach in a steady rhythm, contrasting with the storm in his mind. He remembered Nancy's words. "You should observe more." What wasn't he seeing? What was right before his eyes that he refused to acknowledge? His mother had always been a strong, independent woman, full of life. The same woman who had single-handedly managed the family business after his father's passing. The same woman who had never shown weakness, even in the most difficult moments. How could she, in a few months, have transformed into that fragile and submissive figure he saw now? He thought of Helen, of the way she had entered his life like a hurricane, conquering him with her intelligence and beauty. He remembered how she had always insisted that his mother come live with them, saying it would be better for everyone. At the time, it had seemed a gesture of love and consideration. Now, he began to question it. The night wore on when Robert made a decision. The next morning, he would return to the mansion earlier, before Helen woke up. He needed to talk to his mother, alone, without interference. In the mansion's bedroom, Eleanor tried to write in her diary, but her aching hands made the task difficult. Since she was young, she had maintained this habit, recording her thoughts, fears, and hopes. It was a way to organize her mind, to vent without bothering anyone. In recent weeks, however, the diary had become her only true confidant. Today, Helen said, "I'm getting too slow for the household chores," she wrote with trembling letters. She suggested again that I might be happier in a suitable place for people my age. Robert seemed disturbed after dinner. "I fear this will cause problems between them. Perhaps it's better for me to accept the idea of the clinic. I don't want to be a cause of discord in my son's marriage." A tear fell onto the page, blurring the ink. Eleanor closed the diary and put it in the nightstand drawer, not noticing that she had dropped a small bookmark on the floor. The next morning, Helen woke up early, contrary to her habit. Something in Robert's voice during the phone call had bothered her. She dressed quickly and went to Mrs. Eleanor's room, entering without knocking. The elderly woman was still asleep, exhausted after another day of tasks too heavy for her age. Helen observed her for a moment, her face a mask of indifference. Her eyes scanned the room, stopping at the nightstand. "What do we have here?" she murmured, noticing the corner of a notebook in the half-open drawer. Carefully, so as not to make a sound, she removed the diary and leafed through it. Her face hardened as she read some passages where Eleanor expressed her anguish and pain. That notebook was dangerous. If Robert found it, she put the diary in her purse and silently left the room. Later, she would think about what to do with those compromising pages. Robert arrived at the mansion shortly after 8 in the morning. To his surprise, Helen was already awake, having coffee on the back porch. "Darling, what a wonderful surprise," she exclaimed, getting up to kiss him. "I thought you'd only come for lunch with the mayor." "I finished the meeting early and decided to come home. Where's my mother?" "Still sleeping, I believe." Helen smiled, pouring him a cup of coffee. "Yesterday she had a busy day. She insisted on helping with the attic cleaning, even though I said it wasn't necessary." Robert frowned. "My mother cleaning the attic? Why did you allow that? You know she can barely hold a cup without trembling." "You know your mother, dear." Stubborn as ever. She said she needed to feel useful. Helen placed her hand on his, her touch soft as always. "I've been very worried about her lately. I think we should consider some alternatives for her well-being." "What kind of alternatives?" "There are excellent nursing homes in the area, places where she would receive specialized care, have companionship from people her age, suitable activities." Helen spoke with studied enthusiasm. "It would be better for her and for us." Robert watched her closely, searching for something in her face, in her eyes, that would confirm or dismiss the suspicions that were beginning to grow. "I'll talk to her before we decide anything," he finally said, getting up. "She's my mother, and the final decision will be hers." On his way to his mother's room, Robert met Nancy, who was carrying a tray with breakfast for Mrs. Eleanor. "Good morning, Mr. Miller. What a surprise to see you here so early. I came to see how my mother is." "I'll take that to her, Nancy." The housekeeper hesitated, looking nervously around. "Mr. Robert, can I say something? It's not my place to interfere, but—" "Speak, Nancy. I've known you since I was born. If you have something to say, say it. Your mother is not well here. Mrs. Helen—" She lowered her voice even more. "It's not what it seems, Mr. Miller. Your mother suffers in silence. We all see it, but no one dares to speak." Robert felt a weight in his stomach. "What exactly are you saying, Nancy?" "I'm saying that your mother is treated like a maid. Worse than a maid, because at least we get paid and have days off." Nancy's eyes filled with tears. "She cleans, tidies, is humiliated daily. And Mrs. Helen, well, she pretends to care. But when you're not around, she's a different person." Before Robert could respond, they heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Helen coming up the stairs with a radiant smile. "Oh, you're here. Nancy, dear, you can let me take Mrs. Eleanor's coffee myself. Robert and I want to surprise her." Nancy looked from Helen to Robert, and then handed over the tray, quickly withdrawing. What was she telling you? Helen asked, as soon as the housekeeper disappeared down the hallway. Nothing important. Let's go see my mother. In the room, they found Mrs. Eleanor already awake, sitting in the armchair by the window. Upon seeing her son, her face lit up momentarily, but soon assumed a cautious expression upon noticing Helen's presence. "Good morning, Mum, we brought your coffee." "What a pleasant surprise, son." Eleanor smiled timidly. "But you didn't need to bother. I could have come down." Helen placed the tray on the table with an exaggeratedly gentle gesture. "Nonsense, dear. You deserve to be pampered once in a while." Robert observed the interaction between the two women, noticing the underlying tension, the almost imperceptible fear in his mother's eyes. Something was not right. Nothing was right. "Helen, I need to talk to my mother alone. Family matters." A flash of irritation crossed Helen's face, quickly replaced by a comprehending smile. "Of course, darling. I'll get ahead with the preparations for lunch with the mayor. Don't take too long. We need to be there by noon." As soon as the door closed behind Helen, Robert knelt before his mother, holding her trembling hands. "Now, Mom, I want the truth. What is happening in this house?" Eleanor averted her gaze, her hands fidgeting nervously. "I don't know what you're talking about, son. Everything is fine." "No, it's not. I saw how you reacted when Helen came in. I saw the fear in your eyes." Robert gently squeezed her hands. "I need you to trust me." Eleanor hesitated, her eyes welling up. For a moment, Robert thought she would speak, but then fear returned to dominate her expression. "I'm just tired, son. Age weighs." She forced a smile. "Helen takes good care of me, don't worry." Frustrated, Robert stood up and walked around the room. His gaze stopped at something on the floor, near the nightstand. A small, handmade bookmark, which he himself had given his mother for a distant birthday. He bent down to pick it up. "Your diary, Mom, where is it?" Eleanor paled. "In the drawer, as always." Robert opened the drawer. It was empty. The missing diary was like a trigger for Robert. As his mother looked confusedly at the empty drawer, a certainty grew within him. Something dark was happening in that house, right under his nose. "Who could have taken it?" Eleanor murmured, genuinely disturbed. "I always keep it here." "How long have you been writing in that diary, Mum?" "For years, since your father passed away." She wrung her hands nervously. "But it's not important. They're just an old woman's thoughts." "It is important," Robert interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. "If someone took something of yours without permission, I want to know who it was and why." At that moment, Helen returned to the room, her expression perfectly composed into a mask of concern. "Is everything all right here?" "I heard raised voices." "My mother's diary is missing," Robert replied, observing his wife's reaction carefully. "Do you know anything about it?" For a fraction of a second, something flashed in Helen's eyes. Surprise, guilt, but her face remained impassive. "Diary? I didn't know Mrs. Eleanor kept one." She approached her mother-in-law with solicitude. Perhaps she put it somewhere else and forgot. Lately, her memory has been so fragile. Eleanor opened her mouth to protest, but restrained herself, lowering her eyes. "It must be that," she murmured. "Or perhaps someone took it," Robert insisted, still staring at his wife. Helen met his gaze without faltering. "Who would do that, darling? And why?" "An elderly lady's diary would hardly be of interest to anyone." "That's what I intend to find out." Robert checked his watch. "We'll be late for lunch with the mayor if we don't hurry. Mum, rest a little. We'll talk later." After they left the room, Helen held Robert's arm in the hallway. "I'm worried about you," she said softly. "This sudden obsession with your mother, this distrust, it's not like you." "Perhaps I've been inattentive for too long," Robert replied, gently disengaging himself. "I'll change and meet you downstairs in 15 minutes. During the drive to the restaurant where they would meet the mayor, the silence in the car was palpable. Helen tried several times to start a conversation, but Robert responded with monosyllables, his mind churning with doubts. At the restaurant, however, both assumed their social roles with perfection. Helen especially shone as the ideal wife, intelligent, educated, attentive. The mayor and his team seemed enchanted with the couple. "You two are truly admirable," the mayor's wife commented during dessert. "So professionally successful and still caring for an elderly mother at home. Nowadays, most people just hire caregivers or send them to clinics." "Family is everything to us," Helen replied with a radiant smile, placing her hand on Robert's. Isn't that right, darling? Robert nodded mechanically, observing his wife with new eyes. Who was this woman really? The dedicated wife and daughter-in-law everyone saw, or someone completely different? Back at the mansion, Robert went straight to his office, claiming pending work. In truth, he wanted time to think, to plan. Towards evening, he called Julian, his trusted driver for over a decade. Julian, I need you to do something discreetly for me. At your service, Mr. Miller. I want to install security cameras in the house. Small, discreet, that won't draw attention. Robert scribbled something on a piece of paper. These are the main rooms where I want them installed. Can you arrange this for tomorrow while I'm with Helen at the charity event? Julian took the paper, somewhat surprised. May I ask the reason, Mr. Robert? Security, he replied simply. And Julian, this stays between us. No one else should know. No one. The next morning, Robert announced that he would take Helen for a long weekend in the Florida Keys, an early celebration for her birthday. Oh, darling, what a wonderful surprise, Helen exclaimed, throwing herself into his arms. But what about your mother? Nancy will keep an eye on her. It's only for 2 days. While Helen packed, Robert went to his mother's room to say goodbye. Will you be all right? He asked, sitting beside her on the bed. Of course, son. Go and enjoy yourself. Eleanor smiled, but her eyes remained sad. When I get back, we'll have a serious talk, and this time I want the whole truth. He gently squeezed her hand. Promise me. Eleanor hesitated, then slowly nodded. I promise. Robert kissed her forehead and left, finding Nancy in the hallway. Nancy, take good care of her, and if anything happens, anything at all, call me immediately. The housekeeper nodded, understanding the seriousness in his voice. During the trip to the Keys, Robert tried hard to act normally. They stayed in a luxurious suite overlooking the sea, dined at sophisticated restaurants, and took boat trips around the idyllic islands. Helen seemed genuinely happy, and for moments Robert almost managed to forget his suspicions. Almost. On Saturday night, while Helen slept, he discreetly checked her cell phone, which was on the nightstand. He found nothing suspicious in recent messages or calls. When he was about to give up, he noticed a hidden folder in the gallery app. When he opened it, his blood ran cold. They were photos of his mother in humiliating situations, cleaning the floor on her knees, carrying heavy buckets, crying alone in the garden. In one of them, particularly disturbing, Helen appeared in the background, laughing as Eleanor tried to get up after an apparent fall. Shocked, Robert transferred the photos to his own phone and returned Helen's device to its original place. He spent the rest of the night awake, battling a toxic mix of guilt, anger, and disbelief. On Sunday afternoon, they returned to the mansion. Helen commented on how distant Robert seemed. You've been strange since yesterday, darling. Did something happen? Just tired. I have a lot of work waiting for me tomorrow. Upon their arrival, they found the house silent. Nancy informed them that Mrs. Eleanor was resting in her room after a slight indisposition the previous night. What kind of indisposition? Robert asked, alarmed. Nothing serious, Mr. Miller. Blood pressure a little high. She's already better. Later, when Helen retired for a long bath, Robert discreetly went to the improvised security room that Julian had set up in a storage room at the back of the property. There, on several small monitors, he could see the images captured by the strategically placed cameras. Everything's working perfectly, Mr. Miller, Julian informed him, recording continuously since Saturday morning as you requested. Anything suspicious? Julian hesitated. Perhaps you should see for yourself. Saturday night around 8 o'clock. Robert watched the indicated recording. It showed his mother in her room, sitting in the armchair, when Helen entered without knocking. The conversation that followed made his stomach churn. So, Mrs. Eleanor, are you enjoying your rest without your little boy around? Helen's voice was completely different. Cold, disdainful. What do you want, Helen? Robert isn't here. Exactly, and it's good that he continues not to know certain things. Helen approached threateningly. Like, for example, the fact that you're getting too senile to live in this house. I'm not senile. I never was. No? Then why do you think your precious diary disappeared? Helen laughed, a metallic sound Robert had never heard before. It was very educational, I must say. So much self-pity, so many complaints. If Robert saw that, he'd think you're really losing touch with reality. You stole my diary? Eleanor stood up, indignant. Stole? What a strong word. Let's say I confiscated it for the sake of family harmony. Helen circled the armchair like a predator. You know, I've been thinking, perhaps it's time to realize that idea of the clinic in Crestwood. A quiet place, far from here, far from Robert. My son would never allow that. Your son does what I want, dear mother-in-law, always has. Helen leaned in, whispering close to Eleanor's face. And when you're gone, I'll finally have everything I always wanted. Robert, this house, the Miller money, everything. You don't love him, Eleanor stated, her voice surprisingly firm. You never did. Love? Helen laughed again. People like me don't need love, Mrs. Eleanor. We need power. And your son has a lot to offer in that aspect. Watching the recording, Robert felt as if something broke inside him. The woman on the screen was not the Helen he knew, or thought he knew. She was a stranger, a cold and calculating manipulator. There's more, Mr. Miller, Julian commented darkly. Sunday morning, the new recording showed Helen on the phone in the garden, speaking in a low but audible voice. Everything's set, Diane. I've paid 3 months in advance at the clinic. After the old woman is admitted, it will be easy to convince Robert to keep his distance. You know how he hates to see suffering. And with her out of the way, I can finally breathe in this house without the ghost of the perfect matriarch hanging over me. Robert continued watching, a knot growing in his throat as the evidence accumulated. Helen humiliating his mother when she thought no one was looking. Helen instructing the maids not to help Mrs. Eleanor with heavy tasks. Helen laughing on the phone about how her mother-in-law had almost fallen down the stairs. Enough, he finally said, turning off the monitor. I've seen enough. What are you going to do, Mr. Miller? Julian asked, concerned. What I should have done a long time ago. Open my eyes. Back at the mansion, Robert found Helen in the living room, flipping through a decorating magazine. I was looking for you, she smiled. I was thinking of redecorating your mother's room, something more cheerful to cheer her up. Robert looked at her, this woman who now seemed like a perfect stranger, and felt a shiver run down his spine. How could he have been so blind? I think that's a great idea, he replied, forcing a smile. We can discuss it tomorrow. Now I'm going to see how my mother is. As he climbed the stairs, Robert felt the weight of the truth on his shoulders. The mask had fallen. And now he needed to protect his mother, whatever the cost. Night fell over the Miller mansion as Robert silently entered his mother's room. Mrs. Eleanor was asleep, her serene face contrasting with the deep marks that age and recent suffering had etched into her skin. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching her breathe. How had he not noticed before? How had he not seen the fear in her eyes, the forced submission, the clear signs of abuse? The weight of guilt was overwhelming. While building concrete empires, his true treasure was being destroyed within his own home. Eleanor slowly opened her eyes, and upon seeing her son, her face lit up with a fragile smile. Robert, you're back. I'm back, Mom, and I won't leave your side again. He held her hands in his. We need to talk. Her expression changed, fear returning instantly. About what, son? About Helen. About what she's been doing to you. Robert took a deep breath. I know everything, Mom. I saw the recordings from the security cameras I had installed. Eleanor paled, trying to pull her hands away. I don't know what you're talking about. Helen has always treated me well. You don't have to lie to protect me anymore, Robert gently interrupted. I saw how she talks to you when she thinks no one is looking. I saw the photos on her phone. You cleaning the house on your knees, carrying heavy buckets. I saw everything, Mum. For a long moment, Eleanor just stared at him, her eyes filling with unshed tears. Then, like a dam finally breaking, she collapsed into silent sobs. Forgive me, son, she murmured through tears. I didn't want to ruin your happiness. She seemed to make you so happy. Robert hugged her, feeling her fragile body tremble against his. You didn't ruin anything. I failed, not noticing what was happening right under my nose. In the following minutes, Eleanor told him everything, how Helen's attitude had gradually changed after she moved into the mansion, how the help around the house turned into humiliating obligations, how she was constantly reminded that she was there out of charity, the veiled threats about being sent to a clinic far from her son. Why didn't you tell me before? Robert asked, wiping her tears. I tried at first, but Helen, she has a way of twisting everything. When I complained, she said I was confused, that it was Alzheimer's beginning. Eleanor sighed deeply. And you believed her. You always believed her. The truth hurt like a dagger. Yes, he had always believed his wife, always accepted her explanations, always seen his mother through the lenses Helen placed before his eyes. "This ends today," he promised, kissing his mother's calloused hands. "But I need you to trust me and do exactly what I ask." Meanwhile, in the master bedroom, Helen finished getting ready for dinner. She admired herself in the mirror, satisfied with what she saw. She looked especially beautiful that night, in a new dress that had cost a small fortune. Miller money, of course. She smiled at her reflection, thinking about how everything was going according to plan. In a few days, the old woman would be in the clinic, and she would finally be the only woman in Robert's life. She would be the absolute mistress of that mansion she had coveted so much since the first time she laid eyes on it. "Helen?" Robert's voice came from the doorway. "Can we talk?" "Of course, darling." She turned, showing off her new dress. "What do you think? Too much for a dinner for two?" "It's perfect," Robert replied, his tone neutral. "Actually, I thought we might invite my mother to dinner with us tonight. It's been a while since we had a family moment." Helen disguised the instant irritation she felt. "Of course, if that's what you want, but your mother seemed so tired earlier. Perhaps it's better to let her rest." "I insist, it will be important for all of us." Robert approached, kissing her lightly on the forehead. "I asked Nancy to prepare that lobster you love." "You're different," Helen observed, studying him. "Did something happen?" "Perhaps. But we'll talk during dinner." He smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Shall we meet downstairs in 30 minutes? Alone again, Helen felt an inexplicable unease. Something in Robert's behavior bothered her. He seemed distant, observant, almost suspicious. Nonsense, she thought, adjusting the pearl necklace around her neck. Robert trusted her blindly. Always had. At 8 o'clock sharp, Helen descended to the dining room, decorated with candles and fresh flowers. Robert was already there, speaking in a low voice with Mrs. Eleanor, who seemed strangely calm, almost serene. "Good evening, everyone," Helen announced, her voice melodious. "What a lovely surprise, Mrs. Eleanor. How nice that you felt up to joining us." The elderly woman smiled politely, but did not respond. Robert pulled out a chair for his wife, and then took his place at the head of the table. Dinner began quietly, with Nancy serving the appetizer, an asparagus soup that Helen loved. The conversation flowed superficially, with Robert commenting on the trip to the Keys and his plans for the company in the coming weeks. It was during dessert, a passion fruit mousse served in crystal glasses, that the atmosphere changed. Robert placed his napkin on the table and looked directly at Helen. "Darling, I have a question for you. What do you know about a clinic in Crestwood?" Helen swallowed hard but maintained her composure. "Crestwood? I don't know what you're talking about." "Strange, because I found some receipts with your name on them. Monthly payments for the Serene Valley Clinic. 3 months in advance from what I saw." A heavy silence fell over the table. Helen slowly put down her fork, her mind quickly calculating the best response. "Oh, that. It's a spa I've been researching. I wanted to surprise you, a week of relaxation after that big contract closed." She smiled, touching Robert's hand on the table. "Did I ruin the surprise?" "The interesting thing is, it's not a spa, Helen. It's a nursing home, and the admission form had my mother's name on it." Helen's smile wavered for an instant, but she quickly recomposed herself. "Oh, there must be some mistake. Perhaps I saw the wrong place. Or maybe I filled in her name by mistake. I was distracted." "Or perhaps," Robert continued, his tone still calm, "you were planning to admit her there without my knowledge, or perhaps with my consent, after convincing me it would be the best for her." Helen laughed, but the sound came out forced. "What nonsense, Robert. Why would I do something like that?" "I don't know, Helen. Why would you make my mother clean bathrooms on her knees? Why would you make her carry heavy buckets with hands deformed by arthritis? Why would you constantly humiliate her when you thought no one was looking?" The color drained from Helen's face. Her eyes darted between Robert and Eleanor, who watched everything in silence. Who's been making up these lies?" Her voice went up an octave. "It was her, wasn't it? I always knew she didn't like me. She's trying to separate us." "No one made up anything, Helen." Robert took out his cell phone and showed her the screen. "I saw it, with my own eyes." The photo on the screen showed Helen laughing, while Eleanor, in the background, was on the floor trying to get up. "Where did you get that?" Helen whispered, her face a mask of shock. "From your own phone." "And there's more." Robert slid his finger across the screen, showing photo after incriminating photo. "But that's not all I saw. I installed cameras around the house before we went to the Keys. You spied on me?" The disbelief in Helen's voice was genuine. "I protected my family," Robert corrected, "and thanks to that, I finally saw the real Helen." Suddenly, her expression changed. Shock and indignation gave way to a calculating coldness Robert had never seen before. "And what exactly did you see?" Helen asked, leaning back in her chair. "I saw you threatening my mother. I saw you laughing at her when she fell. I saw you confessing to your friend Diane that you never loved me, that you only wanted the Miller money." Helen laughed, a different sound from the melodious laugh Robert knew. It was a harsh, almost cruel sound. "You know what your problem is, Robert. You've always been too naive. You always believed the world was this rosy place where everyone is good and kind." She leaned forward. "I gave you what you wanted, the perfect wife, the ideal companion, and in return I only asked for a little place in this fortune you don't even know how to manage properly. And my mother. What was the plan for her?" "Your mother." Helen turned to Eleanor, her eyes hard. "Your mother was always an obstacle. The saint you worship, the woman no other could surpass. Always between us, always giving her opinion, always interfering." Her tone became increasingly bitter. "I thought that with time she would give up and leave on her own. But no, sir, she's too stubborn, too attached to her precious son. So you decided to make her life a living hell to force her out. It wasn't that planned at first." Helen shrugged. "I started by asking for small favors, seeing how much she could take. And do you know what I discovered? That she could take anything. Absolutely anything, if she thought it would keep you happy." She looked at Eleanor with disdain. "Pathetic, isn't it? This unconditional love, this willingness for self-sacrifice." Eleanor, who until then had remained silent, spoke with a surprisingly firm voice. "Love is not pathetic, Helen. Pathetic is living without it, like you." Helen turned sharply, as if she had been slapped. "What do you know about me, about my life?" Her eyes flashed with contained anger. Always so perfect, so admired, the brave widow who raised her son alone, who managed the family business, who never needed anyone. "I never said I didn't need anyone," Eleanor replied calmly. "I always needed. My son, my friends, even you, Helen. I tried so many times to be a good mother-in-law, a friend to you." "I didn't want your friendship," Helen exploded. "I wanted your place. This house, this family, all of this should be mine. Mine. Do you understand? Without your shadow constantly looming, without your memories, without your presence reminding everyone that you came first." Robert watched, dumbfounded, this new Helen emerge before his eyes. Where was the sweet and understanding woman he had known? Had it all been an illusion, a carefully constructed mask? "Why, Helen?" he finally asked. "Why marry me if you didn't love me?" Helen looked at him as if the answer were obvious. "For security, for status, for this life." She gestured around, indicating the luxury that surrounded them. "I grew up with nothing, Robert, absolutely nothing. I swore I would have everything one day, and you were my passport to that. And love? Did it never mean anything to you?" "Love is a luxury that people like me cannot afford." Helen laughed bitterly. "I learned early on that I could only count on myself, that I needed to use every weapon I had to survive. And it worked, didn't it? Look at me now." "I look at you and I see a stranger," Robert replied, his voice filled with disappointment. "No, darling, you see the real Helen, without masks, without pretense." She raised her wine glass in an ironic toast. "I must admit, it's a relief to finally be myself." The dining room fell into an oppressive silence. Outside, the rain began to fall, beating against the mansion's windows like furious tears. 3 people at the table. 3 lives intertwined by lies and secrets, now exposed to the raw light of truth. The raindrops intensified against the mansion's windows, creating a tense symphony that seemed to accompany the drama unfolding inside. Nancy and the other staff had discreetly withdrawn after serving dessert, sensing that something serious was happening between the employers. The silence that followed Helen's confession weighed like lead in the air. Robert was the first to break it, slowly rising. "I want you out of this house," he said, his voice controlled but firm. "Today." Helen laughed, crossing her legs elegantly. "Don't be ridiculous. This is my house too. Legally, half of all this belongs to me. That can be resolved by lawyers. What cannot wait is your departure." "And if I refuse?" Helen raised an eyebrow, defiant. "Are you going to drag me out? Call the police?" "Think of the scandal, Robert. Think of how this would affect your precious businesses, your reputation." "I don't care about scandals." Robert approached, his gaze fixed on hers. "And as for the legal part, I have enough evidence of elder abuse to ensure you don't leave with a single cent from this family." A shadow of concern crossed Helen's face, but she quickly regained her composure. "Evidence? A few amateur photos and videos? Please." She stood up, facing him. "No one would believe that the perfect Helen Miller, known for her charity work and her work with needy elders, would mistreat her own mother-in-law." "I would," said a voice from the doorway. Everyone turned. Diane, Helen's best friend, stood there, elegant in her black dress, a grave expression on her face. "Diane?" Helen paled. "What are you doing here?" "Robert called me," Diane replied, entering the room. "He asked me to come for an important conversation." Helen looked from Diane to Robert, confusion evident on her face. "I don't understand. Last night, after seeing the recordings," Robert explained, "I called Diane. I wanted to hear from her herself if she knew what you'd been doing." "And she confirmed everything," Diane added, her gaze fixed on her friend. "Forgive me, Helen, but I couldn't be complicit in this anymore. When Robert told me and showed me the evidence, I realized this went too far." Helen recoiled as if she had been slapped. "You betrayed me, you, my best friend." "Friendship doesn't mean supporting cruelty, Helen." Diane approached Mrs. Eleanor, gently touching her shoulder. "I always knew you were ambitious, determined, but I never imagined you would go this far." "Hypocrite," Helen hissed, her face contorting with rage. "How many times did you laugh with me? How many times did you encourage me?" "I never thought it was real," Diane defended herself. "I thought they were just your venting, your exaggerations, until I saw the photos, the videos." She shook her head, visibly disturbed. "That wasn't you, Helen. Or maybe it was, and I never knew the real you." Helen looked around, feeling cornered. Her mind worked frantically, searching for a way out. "All right," she finally said, adjusting her dress with calculated gestures. "I see I've been defeated. I will leave this house, but with what is rightfully mine. Half of everything, Robert. This is the price of my discretion." "There will be no negotiation," Robert replied coldly. "Not after what you did to my mother." "Ah, always the mother," Helen exploded, momentarily losing her composure. "Always her first. Did you know that our entire marriage I had to compete with a ghost? The Saint Eleanor, the perfect matriarch? No woman would ever be good enough compared to her." "That's not true, Helen," Eleanor intervened softly. "I never wanted to take your place. I just wanted to see my son happy." "Lies." Helen took a step forward, her eyes flashing. "You always looked at me with suspicion, always insinuating that I wasn't good enough for your precious son." "You are distorting things," Eleanor replied, maintaining her calm. "I tried in every way to be your friend, your family." "I didn't need more family," Helen shouted, her voice echoing through the room. "I needed to be the only one in Robert's life, the only one in this house." Robert watched, astonished, this possessive and obsessive side of Helen that he had never seen before. It was as if a mask had fallen, revealing something monstrous beneath the beauty and elegance. "Enough, Helen," he said firmly. "Diane came here for another reason too. She will accompany you to the apartment in the Hamptons. You will stay there until everything is legally resolved." Helen laughed bitterly. "Do you really think I'm going to accept that? Being expelled from my own home, escorted like a criminal?" "You have no choice," Robert replied, "unless you prefer me to call the authorities right now. I'm sure the press would love this story. New York socialite mistreats elderly mother-in-law." Helen's face paled. Her public image, carefully built over the years, was too important to be destroyed like this. "You wouldn't do that," she murmured, less confident. "Test me." The two stared at each other in silence, a battle of wills. It was Helen who looked away first. "All right, I'll go with Diane to the apartment. But this isn't over, Robert. Far from it. She adjusted her posture, regaining some of her haughtiness. "I may leave this house today, but I won't leave your life so easily, nor your fortune." She then turned to Eleanor, a last look filled with resentment. "As for you, enjoy your victory. It won't last long. Robert may be blinded by filial devotion now, but he'll soon realize the burden you represent. And when that day comes, I won't be here to blame." Eleanor did not respond, only met Helen's gaze with a silent dignity that seemed to infuriate her even more. "Let's go, Diane," Helen ordered, heading for the door. "I want to get out of this house as soon as possible." "Not before you return my mother's diary," Robert interposed. Helen stopped, turning slowly. A cruel smile played on her lips. "The diary? Oh, I'm afraid that's no longer possible." "What did you do with it?" Eleanor asked, her voice betraying concern for the first time. "Let's just say it had an unfortunate encounter with the fireplace, the night I found it." Helen smiled as she saw the shock on Eleanor's face. So many memories, so many precious feelings, reduced to ashes. A shame, isn't it? Robert took a step forward, anger finally taking over his face. "Get out, now, before I forget that I was raised to respect women." Helen laughed, but there was a tremor in her voice. "Goodbye, Robert. We'll see each other in court." She turned to Diane. "Let's get this over with." The two left, leaving behind a silence laden with emotions. Nancy appeared discreetly at the door, her face concerned. "May I come in, Mr. Miller?" "Of course, Nancy." The housekeeper timidly approached Mrs. Eleanor. "Are you all right? Can I bring you some tea, something to calm you?" Eleanor smiled faintly, touching the housekeeper's hand. "I'm fine, Nancy. Better than I've been in a long time, actually." Robert sat beside his mother, putting his arm around her shoulders. "I'm so sorry about your diary. I know how much it meant to you." "They're just words on paper," Eleanor replied, though her eyes betrayed sadness. "The memories are still here." She touched her chest. "And now we can create new, better ones." Nancy cleared her throat nervously. "Mr. Robert, there's one more thing you should know." "What is it, Nancy?" "About Mrs. Eleanor's diary." She hesitated. "The one Mrs. Helen burned. It wasn't the only one." Eleanor looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" "Do you remember about 5 months ago, when you started to suspect your things were being tampered with? You asked me to keep some things in my room just in case." "The old diary," Eleanor exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. "The brown-covered one I finished before starting the new one." Nancy nodded, smiling. "It's stored in a box under my bed, along with some old photographs you wanted to protect." "Oh, Nancy," Eleanor hugged the housekeeper, tears of relief shining in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need to thank me, Mrs. Eleanor. You've always been like a mother to all of us here." Nancy smiled, emotional. "No one could stand to see what was happening. We tried to protect you as best we could, but—" "You did what was possible," Robert gently interrupted. "The mistake was mine for not realizing it sooner." Robert's phone rang. It was Diane. "We're at the apartment," she informed him. "Helen is, well, considering the circumstances, very furious, obviously, but safe." "Thank you, Diane, for everything." "Don't thank me." Her voice sounded tired. "Just trying to correct the mistake of having closed my eyes for so long. I never imagined she was capable of such cruelty." After hanging up, Robert turned to his mother and Nancy. "Tomorrow I will call my lawyer. I want to resolve this situation as quickly as possible." "It will be a difficult process, son," Eleanor observed. "Helen won't give up easily." "It doesn't matter. We will face whatever it takes together." Robert kissed his mother's forehead. "The important thing is that now you are safe, and I promise that no one will ever hurt you like this again." Nancy discreetly withdrew, leaving mother and son alone. The rain outside began to subside, as if the sky itself recognized that the worst of the storm had passed. "You know, son," Eleanor commented after a long silence, "I always feared this day would come. The day you would see Helen for who she really is." "Why?" "Because I knew how much it would hurt you. You loved her so much." She caressed her son's face. "And I hated to think I would be the cause of your marriage ending." "You were not the cause of anything," Robert replied firmly. "Helen made her choices. She chose lies, cruelty, manipulation. Still, it hurts to see your suffering. What hurts more is to think about what you went through, alone, humiliated in your own home, by someone who should have respected and loved you." Robert held his mother's hands. "I promise that from now on, everything will be different." Eleanor smiled, a genuine smile that illuminated her tired face. "It already is different, my son. It already is." Outside, the last drops of rain fell, and through the dissipating clouds, some stars began to shine shyly over the Miller mansion. A silent promise that, after the storm, calm always comes. 3 months passed since the night of the storm, when the masks finally fell. The Miller mansion, once a stage of oppressive silences and hidden pains, now breathed renewed air. The windows remained open most of the day, letting the cool mountain breeze circulate freely through the rooms, as if even the wind cooperated to clear the last traces of bitterness that might still linger in the corners. It was a Saturday morning when Robert entered the kitchen and found his mother preparing breakfast, assisted by Nancy. The two chatted animatedly, laughing at something Julian had just told them. The scene, so domestic and welcoming, warmed his heart. "Good morning to the 3 conspirators of my kitchen," he joked, kissing his mother on the forehead. "Your son thinks we're plotting something, Mrs. Eleanor." Nancy laughed, beating a batter that smelled deliciously of cinnamon. "And aren't you?" Robert raised an eyebrow, stealing a piece of chopped fruit from the bowl. "Perhaps." Eleanor smiled mysteriously. "But you'll only know later." Robert observed his mother's hands as she carefully stirred a pot on the stove. They were less swollen, her movements firmer. The treatment with the new rheumatologist was taking effect, as were the physical therapy sessions 3 times a week. "Has the pain improved?" he asked, pouring himself coffee. "Much," Eleanor replied, her eyes shining. "Dr. Ferdinand said I'm responding well to the medication, and the physical therapist Louise works miracles with those exercises. It's a good thing Mr. Robert finally convinced you to get treatment," Nancy commented, looking meaningfully at her employer. Eleanor shrugged, a gesture that recalled the strong and determined woman she had always been, and who was now gradually returning to be. "I was stubborn, I admit, but now I see the difference." "You've always been too independent," Robert commented admiringly, "but accepting help doesn't diminish that independence." "Your father used to say the same thing." Eleanor smiled at the memory. "Anthony always complained that I wanted to carry the world on my shoulders." The mention of his father brought a moment of nostalgia for both. Robert was only 15 when Anthony Miller departed this world, a victim of a sudden heart attack. Since then, Eleanor had single-handedly taken on both raising her son and managing the family business, a construction company that, at the time, was just starting out. "He would be proud to see what you've built," Robert said, gently squeezing his mother's hand. "And of the man you've become," she added, emotional. Robert's cell phone rang, interrupting the moment. It was Charles Bennett, his lawyer. "Good news," Charles said on the phone. Helen finally accepted the settlement. Robert went out to the porch to continue the conversation. In recent months, the divorce process had dragged on, with Helen initially fighting for half of all assets and properties. "She understood she had no other option?" Robert asked, observing the garden where gardeners worked on restoring the flower beds that Eleanor loved so much. "Let's just say that the testimony of Diane and the house staff, combined with the recordings, didn't leave much room for maneuver." Charles sounded satisfied. "In the end, she accepted the apartment in the Hamptons, a fixed sum of money, and the commitment to never again contact you or your mother. And the confidentiality agreement, signed. She knows that if she says anything publicly, she loses everything." Robert took a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. It was the formal closing of a painful chapter, the real possibility of moving forward without constantly looking back. "Thank you, Charles, for everything. It's my job, and it was a pleasure, considering the circumstances." The lawyer paused. "How is Mrs. Eleanor?" "Better every day. Returning to herself." "I'm happy to hear that. Your mother is an extraordinary woman." After hanging up, Robert remained on the porch for a few minutes, assimilating the news. Helen was officially out of their lives. The thought brought relief, but also a tinge of sadness for what might have been, for the dreams he had built alongside a woman who, he now knew, had never truly existed. When he returned to the kitchen, he found his mother alone, setting the table for coffee. "Good news?" she asked, noticing his lighter expression. "Great news. Helen accepted the settlement. It's over." Eleanor nodded, understanding. "How do you feel?" "Relieved. Sad. Confused." Robert sat down, running his hand through his hair. 8 years, Mom. 8 years believing in something that didn't exist. It existed for you, she replied softly. Your feelings were real, even if hers weren't. Sometimes I wonder how I didn't realize it sooner. The signs were there. Love is like that, son. It makes us see what we want to see. Eleanor poured him a fresh cup of coffee. And Helen was very good at her act. Manipulators usually are. They were silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. It was Robert who spoke first. Do you remember what Dad always said? That after the heaviest rain, the sun shines brighter. Eleanor smiled, her eyes lighting up with the memory. I remember, and he was right. He certainly was. Look at us now. Indeed, despite the emotional scars they still carried, there was a lightness in the mansion that hadn't existed before. Robert had reduced his workload to spend more time at home. Eleanor's old friends, whom Helen had subtly pushed away over the years, began frequenting the property again. Music once again played through the halls. Laughter echoed in the garden. Later that day, the mystery of the kitchen conspiracy was revealed. A small surprise party to celebrate Nancy's birthday. The garden was decorated with lights and flowers. A generous table was set under the trees, and all the house staff and their families were invited to participate. It was your mother's idea, Julian told Robert, as they watched Eleanor and Nancy chatting animatedly with some guests. She said it was time to make this house a home for everyone again. Robert smiled, touched. She always knew how to make people feel welcome. It's a gift, Mr. Miller, something that comes from within. The afternoon progressed when Mrs. Eleanor approached her son, who was observing the scene from a chair in the corner of the garden. May I join you? She asked, her eyes shining in a way he hadn't seen in a long time. Always, Mom. They sat side by side, observing the celebration around them. Children ran across the lawn. Adults talked in small groups. Music played softly in the background. You know, son, Eleanor said after a moment, your father would be proud to see how you handled all this. I don't know, Mom. It took me so long to realize what was happening. But when you did, you acted with courage and determination. She squeezed his hand, and more importantly, with compassion. Even after everything, you treated Helen with dignity. You didn't seek revenge, only justice. I learned from the best, Robert smiled. You always said that bitterness is a poison we drink, hoping the other person dies. It seems you paid attention to my sermons after all, Eleanor laughed. One of Julian's children timidly approached, handing a drawing to Mrs. Eleanor. It's for you, said the boy, no more than 6 years old. It's you with the flowers. Eleanor took the drawing, visibly moved. It was a simple figure, made with colored crayons, showing a gray-haired woman surrounded by flowers of all colors. It's beautiful, Peter. I'll cherish it. The boy smiled, satisfied, and ran back to play with the other children. Children feel it, don't they? Eleanor commented, looking at the drawing with affection. They perceive when a place is safe, when they are welcome. How you transformed this house again, Robert observed. We transformed it, son, together. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, guests gathered around a large table for dinner. Nancy, emotional with the surprise celebration, gave a short speech thanking everyone, especially Mrs. Eleanor, who was always more than an employer. She was a friend, a mother to all of us. Robert watched his mother during dinner, the way she interacted with everyone, how her face lit up when she laughed, how her hands, still marked by arthritis but now less painful, gestured as she told old stories. She was returning to be the strong and vibrant woman she had always been, before fear and humiliation had diminished her. After dinner, while some guests danced in the area prepared for it, Robert found his mother sitting on a bench in the garden, contemplating the stars that began to dot the night sky. A cruise through your thoughts, he said, sitting beside her. I was thinking about new beginnings, Eleanor replied, smiling, about how life gives us second chances when we least expect them. Are you talking about us? About all of us? About the house? About the family we've formed with these wonderful people? She gestured, encompassing the garden, where the party continued lively. For a while I thought I had lost all of this forever. I would never allow it, Robert promised, hugging her shoulders. I only regret not realizing it sooner. Don't torture yourself with that, son. The important thing is that you realized it in time. She looked at him with tenderness. And now it's time to look forward. You're young. You have a whole life ahead of you. Are we talking about dating, Mum? Robert laughed, surprised by the change of subject. Why not? Life goes on, son, and you deserve to find someone who truly loves you, without hidden agendas. Eleanor shrugged. Who knows? Maybe even give me some grandchildren to spoil. One thing at a time, please. Robert feigned horror, making her laugh. Let's enjoy this moment, just the two of us, as family. As it always should have been, she agreed. They remained silent for a while, appreciating the music, the laughter, the life that pulsed around them. Finally, Robert spoke what was in his heart. You know what I learned from all this, Mom? That true love doesn't suffocate, doesn't control, doesn't diminish the other. He looked at her with admiration. True love liberates, strengthens, makes one grow, like yours for me. And yours for me, son, Eleanor replied, emotional, which never allowed me to give up, even in the darkest moments. I promise that from now on there will only be light in our lives. Eleanor smiled, knowing that life would bring its own challenges, as always, but confident that they would face whatever came together. Your father used to say that we can't control the storms, only learn to dance in the rain, she commented, looking at the stars. And you've always been the best dancer I know, Robert replied, kissing her wrinkled hand. That night, under the starry Aspenwood sky, surrounded by people who truly cared about them, Robert and Eleanor Miller finally felt they were home, not just in the imposing mansion they inhabited, but in the home they had rebuilt together, made not of walls and roofs, but of truth, respect, and unconditional love. The hands that once cleaned the floor of humiliation now rested not in resignation, but in peace, and in the hearts of mother and son blossomed the certainty that true bonds, even when tested by the hardest trials, always find their way back home. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that Eleanor and Robert's story has touched your hearts. To continue this emotional journey, we have prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories. Find it here by clicking on the left. If you enjoyed this narrative about the unconditional love between mother and son, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity of human relationships with the emotions and twists you love. Share your own experiences about family bonds that overcame obstacles in the comments. Your story can inspire many other people. We await you on our next emotional journey.